Hello everyone. Today we will talk about managing for ethics and social responsibility in a global business environment. In the context of increasing global business, managers are encountering numerous ethical dilemmas in international environments. Managing for ethics and social responsibility becomes significantly more challenging when dealing with foreign cultures, languages, increased stress, and a wide array of stakeholders. These stakeholders range from governments with varying laws to diverse business partners, employees, customers, and civil society groups. Decision-making for managers becomes intricate due to the multitude of stakeholders and the novel ethical issues they face, including corruption, human rights violations, workplace conditions, environmental concerns, and cultural differences. Business people, especially in developing nations, must navigate conflicting ethical standards, requiring them to carefully consider which values to uphold regardless of the local context. This chapter addresses the general difficulties of foreign assignments and delves into specific challenges related to ethical decision-making in international business, encompassing individual and organizational choices regarding business conduct in diverse cultures, ethical responsibilities, and guiding employees within a global business setting. The chapter begins by highlighting the individual challenges that expatriate managers face during foreign business assignments. With globalization increasing cross-cultural interactions, many overseas postings fail because managers and their families struggle to adjust to new cultural environments. This lack of adjustment often affects job satisfaction, performance, and the willingness to stay in the role. A major issue is the lack of adequate preparation provided by companies, especially American firms. Research shows that clear job expectations, realistic previews of living conditions, and support in navigating ethical dilemmas abroad are essential. Cross-cultural training has proven highly effective in enhancing self-confidence, improving relationships with locals, fostering accurate cultural perceptions, and ultimately boosting job performance. Importantly, training should also extend to the expatriate's spouse, whose well-being significantly influences the manager's success. At senior levels, spouses often serve as informal corporate ambassadors, making their cultural adaptation even more critical. The concept of cultural intelligence (CQ) is introduced as a key factor in determining how well individuals adapt to foreign cultures. CQ involves knowledge about the new culture, motivation to learn and adapt, and the ability to act on that knowledge. Those who excel in all three areas are referred to as cultural chameleons due to their adaptability. Organizations are encouraged to assess an employee's CQ before assigning them to overseas roles, as higher motivation and confidence in adapting lead to better outcomes. Language proficiency is another essential component of cultural adaptation. Learning the host country's language demonstrates respect and commitment, even if fluency is not fully achieved. The ability to understand cultural context in language use is more important than just knowing vocabulary. A story is shared to illustrate how misinterpreting culturally specific language without adequate cultural understanding can lead to confusion or miscommunication. Finally, the chapter turns to the concept of national culture, defined as collective mental programming, which shapes how individuals interpret the world and behave. If expatriates fail to understand the local cultural patterns, they risk viewing foreign behavior solely through their own cultural lens, leading to misunderstandings. Hofstede's cultural dimensions are introduced as valuable tools for understanding ethical and behavioral differences in international business settings. The chapter encourages deeper exploration of such frameworks to enhance cultural awareness and business effectiveness abroad. The concept of individualism versus collectivism highlights significant cultural differences in how societies view the self in relation to others. In individualistic cultures, such as those in the United States, Canada, Australia, and much of Northern Europe, people see themselves as autonomous individuals responsible primarily for themselves and their immediate families. These cultures emphasize personal achievement, independence, and individual decision-making. Success is often defined by one's education, skills, and accomplishments, and hiring practices typically focus on selecting the most qualified individual based on merit. In contrast, collectivist cultures, such as those found in most Asian and Latin American countries, prioritize group harmony, loyalty, and the collective good over personal ambition. People define themselves by their group affiliations and strive to contribute to their group's success. Hiring in these societies considers both qualifications and a candidate's ability to work collaboratively. Personal relationships, family background, and the ability to maintain group harmony are highly valued, and hiring family members is common and expected. Practices such as gift-giving are seen as essential for building trust and group membership, whereas in individualistic cultures, such gestures may be misinterpreted as bribery. These cultural differences extend into ethical practices as well. In individualist cultures, companies often implement formal reporting systems like hotlines to encourage whistleblowing on unethical behavior. However, such systems may feel cold and accusatory in collectivist societies, where public blame can bring shame to the individual and disrupt group harmony. In these cultures, a more informal, rehabilitative approach, focusing on helping the offender reintegrate into the group, may be more effective for managing ethics and compliance. Power distance refers to how much inequality people in a society accept and expect in organizational and social hierarchies. In high-power distance cultures like India, the Philippines, Mexico, people respect authority and accept status differences as natural. Formality, titles, and deference to superiors are important, and challenging authority is often seen as disrespectful. In contrast, low-power distance cultures like the US, Israel, and Northern Europe tend to value equality, and power is seen as earned through expertise rather than position. Employees in such societies are more likely to question authority or report unethical behavior, even if it involves a superior. Cultural selective perception also influences how people interpret events. For example, in collectivist cultures, social relationships may take precedence over legal rules. A case study involving an American couple convicted due to their nephew's criminal actions highlights this. While Americans focused on legal responsibility, Asian students were more concerned with the family loyalty aspect. This example demonstrates how people from different cultures may notice or ignore different elements of a situation based on their cultural priorities. Another important insight is the assumption of behavioral consistency, the belief that if we understand a culture's general norms, we can predict individuals' behavior. This is misleading because individuals often adapt their behavior when interacting with people from other cultures. A humorous story about philosophy and business professors changing their dress for a meeting illustrates this. Both groups adjusted their behavior based on assumptions about the other, resulting in unexpected outcomes. Therefore, understanding cultural norms is just the beginning. One must remain open and responsive to dynamic interpersonal cues. The assumption of cultural homogeneity, that all people within a culture are the same, is equally flawed. Cultural stereotypes overlook individual variation shaped by personal experiences, education, or exposure to other cultures. For example, a Japanese professional with an American MBA may behave very differently from a fellow national with no international experience. Effective international managers avoid rigid stereotypes and remain attentive to individual differences. Finally, the assumption of cultural similarity can also be problematic. Companies often expand into psychically close countries, assuming shared language or history makes them easy markets. However, this false familiarity can lead to poor preparation and misinterpretation. A study of Canadian retailers in the US revealed that underestimating cultural differences led to strategic mistakes. The key takeaway: always research and prepare, regardless of how similar another culture may seem. Success in international business depends on openness, flexibility, and a willingness to continuously learn and adapt. This slide explains Donaldson's approach to developing ethical guidelines for companies operating internationally. It emphasizes finding a balanced ethical framework between two extremes, ethical relativism and ethical imperialism, and offers a practical middle ground for ethical decision-making across cultures. Reject ethical relativism. This means not accepting the idea that anything goes just because it's acceptable in the host culture. Companies shouldn't blindly follow local norms if they violate fundamental human rights or ethical standards. Reject ethical imperialism. This is the opposite extreme, where a company imposes its home country ethical standards without regard for the local context. Donaldson argues that this is insensitive and can cause harm or cultural misunderstanding. Develop an ethical threshold. Donaldson proposes creating a set of core universal values like fairness, respect, and honesty that guide corporate behavior across borders. These core values form a moral baseline or threshold, which can then be adapted into context-specific guidelines for different cultures without compromising ethical integrity. Donaldson promotes a culturally aware but ethically grounded approach to global business conduct. Okay, now the question is, how different are ethical standards in different cultures, really? Business practices vary across cultures, but core ethical values like honesty, respect, and fairness are widely shared. Even in corrupt environments, most people express a desire for honesty and less corruption. Many professionals report working in ethical companies despite being surrounded by unethical practices. Certain ethical principles, such as do not kill and do not steal, are universal. The Golden Rule appears in all major religions, reinforcing the idea that shared moral foundations exist across cultures. However, the interpretation of these values can differ. For instance, honesty may mean directness in one culture and maintaining harmony in another. Fairness is another universal value, but its application varies. Some cultures prioritize equity based on performance, others prefer equality, and some distribute resources based on need. Understanding these cultural differences is essential for ethical decision-making in global business. Interest in business ethics has grown internationally. While the US was once seen as a leader in corporate ethics, countries in Europe, Africa, and Asia have developed their own initiatives. Organizations like Eben and Ben Africa promote ethics education and responsible business practices across continents. Corporate social responsibility and sustainability are taken seriously in Europe, and environmental awareness is rising in Asia. China, in particular, is investing in clean energy and green technologies in response to its environmental challenges. As global interest in ethics and responsibility increases, international business leaders must stay informed about the evolving legal, social, and ethical environments in the countries where they operate. Companies engaged in international operations must establish clear ethical guidelines to help employees navigate legal and cultural differences. Relying solely on ethical relativism, when in Rome, or ethical imperialism applying one standard everywhere is florid. Instead, companies should base their global ethics on core universal values, such as human dignity, human rights, and the Golden Rule, and apply them consistently across borders. These core values must be translated into actionable company policies, like ensuring safe working conditions or prohibiting child labor. Levi Strauss's approach is a good example. When underage workers were found, the company supported their education and income instead of simply firing them. Cultural practices that don't violate core values, like gift giving or family hiring, can be accommodated with clear limits. Research supports the idea that people across cultures agree on core ethical principles, even if they differ on local customs. Companies like Motorola demonstrate how global ethics codes can align with international standards while promoting integrity and responsibility. However, implementing ethics systems can be challenging, especially in cultures where reporting misconduct is taboo. Experts recommend culturally sensitive helplines and involvement of local leadership in designing ethical systems. Importantly, reward systems must reinforce ethical behavior. Employees should be recognized for maintaining integrity, even at the cost of business. Doing so helps build a strong global ethical culture that supports long-term reputation, trust, and compliance. Multinational corporations carry greater ethical responsibility due to their global visibility. Operating across borders introduces diverse legal systems and stakeholders, including host governments, suppliers, and NGOs. Since international law often lacks clarity, companies must rely on their own ethical standards to guide conduct. Choosing to enter a foreign market can challenge a company's legitimacy. Local populations may view corporate motives with suspicion, seeing them as exploitative or controlling. For example, Monsanto failed to consider European attitudes toward genetically modified foods, leading to major backlash and financial loss despite scientific support for its products. Ethical challenges grow when firms operate in countries with corruption, discrimination, or weak labor laws. Companies must decide whether to uphold their own standards or comply with local norms. For instance, some firms ignore strict safety or environmental practices abroad to cut costs, risking their reputation. The fair trade movement and rising consumer awareness highlight the importance of ethical sourcing. Brands like Green Mountain Coffee have gained attention for fair compensation to farmers, though such products still represent a small market share. Globalization and media exposure have increased scrutiny of labor practices. Sweatshop conditions and unsafe supply of factories have damaged the reputations of major brands. Companies can no longer claim ignorance of abuses within their supply chains. Complex issues such as child labor, wages, and working hours require nuanced decisions. While well-intentioned codes may restrict long hours or prohibit child labor, such restrictions can negatively impact workers who rely on income for survival or family support. To manage these risks, many companies like HP and Nike have developed supplier codes of conduct and partnered with other firms to set industry-wide standards. Proactive ethical evaluation before entering new markets or choosing partners has become critical for maintaining legitimacy and long-term success. Global businesses are moving toward shared standards of ethical conduct, supported by efforts from governments, international organizations, and companies themselves. While the variety of initiatives can be overwhelming, progress is evident in establishing a transcultural corporate ethic based on agreed-upon principles. Several intergovernmental agreements over the past 50 years have shaped corporate ethics around four main principles: respect for national sovereignty, social equity, market integrity, and human rights. These principles guide multinational conduct in areas like employment, environmental protection, and political involvement. A key achievement is the OECD Anti-Bribery Convention, which criminalizes bribery of foreign officials and is supported by 36 countries. Though it has limitations, e.g., no mandatory penalties or gift bans, it sets a clear international stance against corruption. Companies like BP go beyond legal standards by banning even small facilitating payments. The Organization of American States (OAS) promotes anti-corruption policies through its Inter-American Convention Against Corruption, although it does not outlaw bribery directly. Multinational companies are indirectly influenced by these agreements when countries pass laws enforcing them. Over time, these agreements also help build informal global norms that companies increasingly recognize and follow. Business leaders are creating their own standards too. The Corks Roundtable, representing US, European, and Japanese firms, developed a global code based on human dignity and Kiyosei, the idea of mutual prosperity through cooperation. These voluntary standards guide corporate responsibility across cultures. The UN Global Compact, launched in 2000, encourages businesses to commit to 10 principles related to human rights, labor, environment, and anti-corruption. Over 5,000 companies in 130 countries have joined, agreeing to integrate these values into their strategies and then report their progress publicly. The UN Convention Against Corruption, in force since 2005, requires countries to criminalize bribery, money laundering, and public fund misuse, while increasing transparency and promoting cooperation among nations. Many companies now develop their own codes of conduct inspired by global standards. Harvard researchers identified 8 key ethical principles common to top global codes: fiduciary duty, property respect, reliability, transparency, human dignity, fairness, citizenship, and responsiveness. These principles represent a growing global consensus on ethical corporate behavior. Companies are encouraged to adopt these shared principles while tailoring them to their unique cultures and values. Together, these efforts help shape a responsible and consistent global business environment.
Thank you for watching. If you liked this video, please like and subscribe to channel.